thank you very much to the worship team. Such beautiful voices, so talented. Thank you so much for your energy and for leading us in worship today. Really appreciate that. It's an honor to be here with you tonight. My name is Samuel Marusca, and I'd like to thank Pera for giving me the topic of this conversation tonight, purpose and meaning. I met a boy. He was born in communist Romania, wasn't more than 5 years old, and he was the happiest boy I've ever met. His father, his name was Augustine. He was a tall and very kind man. And his mother was a housewife and had 10 children. He was number 8. Born at the foot of a mountain in the mountains of Transylvania, in a very small village, walking barefoot, eating organic food, working in the field, spending all day outdoors, and having fun, sleeping with his brothers and sisters, like 7 of them in one room. His father worked in a mine, in a coal mine, and he also did forest work, like most of the people in the village. And his job was to go deep underground, hundreds of feet underground, and drill holes in the ceiling of the mine, very deep holes with a huge drill, and then insert some dynamite in there, then walk off, and then he would detonate so that ceiling would collapse. And then eventually, with a big scaffold, they would make their way up to build a shaft all the way to the surface. So one day, he drilled a number of holes and he sat on the platform, on the scaffold, which was made of wood in those days. It was 1988. And at one point, one of the rocks came loose in the ceiling and hit him. And then this dislodged his helmet, and he lost his helmet on the way. And then that caused the whole platform and the scaffold to collapse. And then he fell head first for about 100 feet or so. The ambulance came to the mine. It was a big event. They took him to the hospital, and after a brain surgery that lasted for more than 6 hours, they managed to put a plate on his skull, and he survived for another few months. He went home, and then a few months later, he passed away. Now, his wife was very, very depressed, and she was heartbroken. She was left with 10 children, and at 5 years old, he didn't quite understand what was happening, but he knew something bad happened. And then a few months later, the mother dies too because of kidney failure. So there are 10 children in a remote village in the countryside of Romania with no parents. Now, what is the purpose of this? What is the meaning of that? Is there any meaning in that suffering, in that tragedy? That boy was me, and I didn't know at the time, but I was going to realize the severity of the tragedy as I grew up. And I realized only about 20 years later that God had a meaning and a purpose, even in the midst of the tragedy. So today, I'd like to talk about purpose and meaning by asking 4 questions. The first one, why is meaning important? Second one, what is meaning? What is the meaning of life? Number 3, how can I develop and how can I understand and discover the meaning of my life? And finally, why now? What should I do now? So, why is meaning important? What is the purpose of life and the meaning of all of this? First of all, I want to ask you a quick question. I want you to answer it. Do we have anyone in school, in full-time education, in education? At university, how many students here? A few hands up, that's good. Anyone in full-time employment? Adults? No one, okay. Oh, just one, that's good. Now, a question for you. Why do you go to school? Can anyone tell me? It's a legal requirement, yes. Any reasons? Any other reasons why you go to school? Any reasons? To be educated. Why do you want to be educated? Anyone? So you can get a job and then provide for your family. Why do you want to provide for your family? Okay, so it stops there. Adults, why do you work? Virgil, why do you work? It's a legal requirement.
Because I have to.
Because you have to. So you can ask why, okay? And the next question is contingent on the previous one. You go to school because it's a requirement, because you want to get a job, you want to pass an exam, you want to get a degree, and then you want to get an education, you want to be able to provide for your family. And then you can ask forever, right? You can ask contingent questions, you can ask the why questions over and over again, but it has to stop somewhere. Where does it stop? It stops with a question or with a fundamental idea that isn't contingent on the previous questions. So, for Aristotle, at the top, the pursuit was the pursuit of happiness. That was at the top. Now, it's a subjective thing. I would like to propose something objective. You need to have something objective as the purpose of your life. For me as a Christian, and for Christians in general, it's God. That's the ultimate purpose of life. It's not the pursuit of happiness. So it has to stop somewhere, and it stops with an objective idea, and that is spiritual, that is faith, that's God. And I would argue that the purpose of life isn't to serve God, but it's to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. And that's what actually you find in John 15, chapter 15, verse 15. I am not calling you servants anymore, because the servant doesn't know what the master is doing, but I'm calling you my friends, because I have made known to you everything that my Lord, my Father, has told me. So that's what Jesus says. We are friends with God. That's the ultimate purpose of life, to glorify God and to enjoy and know Him forever. And notice that this goal, this final objective, this purpose is eternal. It's not only for this life, this is eternal. And this is what the Catechism, the Westminster Confession also says of 1647, which is what our current Christian doctrines are. So the first question in the Westminster Confession is this: what is the end purpose, the end game for everyone? It is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. But why is it really important to understand the meaning of life and to understand your meaning? Your life has a meaning. It's very important because, as Viktor Frankl said, who was a very popular psychiatrist, a doctor in Vienna in between the two wars, and in 1928, Viktor Frankl developed a new therapy called logotherapy. And he discovered a very interesting thing, that happened among teenagers in Vienna at the time. And we were talking about 1928, right? Right after the First World War, many people were wounded, lost family members, and so on. So he discovered there was a suicide epidemic among teenagers. And he looked at the numbers, and they were staggering. And teenagers were depressed. And he noticed that this wave of suicides happened at the end of the year when students received their end-of-year results, the reports. So he did some study, and he developed a very interesting therapy called logotherapy. And he noticed that all of these students linked somehow, tied their failures, their failure in life, with the meaning of life. And they didn't have any meaning. They didn't have any purpose, anything left to live. There was nothing to live for because of their failure. So they associated this failure with the meaning of life. And then he discovered that by talking to them and trying to help them to understand and discover the meaning of life, after 2 years, he developed a program that was implemented nationally. And in 2 years, the suicides reduced to 0 because students understood the meaning of their lives. So that's what happened in 1928. But this crisis, meaning crisis, isn't something that happened 100 years ago. It's also a current modern crisis. We are living through a meaning crisis. And statistics show in America that 3 in 5 young people between the ages of 18 to 25, they don't understand, they don't know what the meaning of their life is. And they don't have any purpose in life. And the statistics are staggering. Over 50% of the people of the same age don't feel they have anything to live for. 75% of teenagers don't know what the meaning of their life is. And many don't have anything to live for. So, and there are also many suicides in teenagers, especially in the United States, where for ages between 18 to 29 is the third cause of death. This is because many people associate meaning with depression and anxiety. They don't have a meaning, and therefore they associate mental health problems with the meaning crisis. So I'd like to say a few things about what this meaning is. What are we getting wrong? There's something going on here. And what we're getting wrong is we've placed our meaning and we're chasing up the things that don't fulfill us, that don't give us any meaning at all. And we think that those are the main things that we should be pursuing in life. For example, status, money. People are pursuing fame or a career or image or a degree perhaps, and they put their faith in that. But if you don't put your faith into something higher than you, then you miss the meaning of life. So what exactly is meaning? Well, there are 3 answers. The first answer is a theistic answer, which is what most Christians say. And Christians say that the meaning of life is tied to your faith, to Christianity, to God. The second answer, and of course in this first answer, you'll find most theologians talking about meaning, the meaning of life, people like Augustine, to Thomas Aquinas, to C.S. Lewis, more recently, of course. You have Rick Warren talking about the purpose, your life driven by purpose, purpose-driven life. And you have people like Harvard professors, for example, talking about the meaning of life. Many Christians, all theologians talk about the same thing. The second answer is the non-theistic answer, or the scientific answer. And most atheists and philosophers will say, if you're asking yourself, I'm going to work, I'm going to school, I'm eating my lunch, coming back home, eating my dinner, go to sleep, repeat. And if you're asking yourself, is there more to life than this? They say there isn't. There is no meaning. This is everything. This is your whole life. So philosophers like Bertrand Russell, for example, famously said, and I quote, "We are the accidental collocation of atoms in the world." And that's what we are. Richard Dawkins said, "DNA doesn't care, nor it thinks. It doesn't think anything. DNA just is, and we all dance to its music." This is Richard Dawkins. There is no meaning. This is it. It all ends here. There are nihilists, and there are other philosophers and secularists, humanists, who say meaning is whatever you want your life to be. You are the leader of your own life. You can do whatever you want. Whatever floats your boat, that's your meaning. So it's created by you. Doesn't matter what everyone thinks, it's created by you. So that's your meaning. That's the secularist society. And the third answer is questioning the question. In other words, when you say, what is the meaning of life? Are you asking the right question? What is there behind the question? What exactly are you asking? Are you asking something about your career? Are you asking something about your inner being? Sigmund Freud said, if you're asking about that, you probably have an issue, a mental health problem, which is normally solved, in his view, with pleasure. Pleasure lies and desire lies at the bottom of all of our being. Others say, what is the meaning of life? What is meaning? What is the meaning of meaning? And you're probably asking the wrong question. There is no answer to such a question. There is no answer. You shouldn't be asking it. Logical positivists of the 30s in Europe, spearheaded by A.J. Ayer here in Oxford in the UK, said, propositions fall into three categories: empirical, non-empirical, and nonsensical. So if you can't prove that something exists, it follows that it's nonsensical. So there's no reason for you to talk about meaning and God, because you can't prove it empirically. Therefore, it's a nonsensical question. A question about meaning is nonsensical. And we have a residual thinking in our current culture that led to scientism, the idea that science can explain everything. And eventually, science will explain everything. Whatever you can't explain scientifically, it follows it doesn't exist. That's why God doesn't exist. There are also the linguists who said they developed the school of semantics. The Ogden and Richards published a book in 1923 called The Meaning of Meaning. And they discussed what exactly is meaning and what causes meaning in our mind. And they developed the semantic triangle. At the top, you have your thought in your mind that is produced in your mind. At the bottom, you have what they called the sign, the symbol of the language, like a word or a word written on a piece of paper. That's the symbol. That's the reference. And then the third thing is the actual object in reality, which is the referent, like a tree, for example. And there's no connection actually between the written symbol, when you write tree on a piece of paper, and the actual tree. So this triangle is the triangle of meaning. It's how we understand, how we deduce meaning in our mind, in our world. So you're probably asking the wrong questions, they say. But today I'm going to talk about the Christian view about meaning. So what exactly is meaning? First of all, meaning is purpose. And if you don't have a purpose, your life is meaningless. You have nothing to live for. And I really like the title of this conference this evening. And these facilities, this building is called the Lighthouse. It's a beautiful metaphor. What is a lighthouse? If you're in the middle of the ocean and you can't see anything around you, you are aimless. Aimlessness is the same as anxiety. If you have too many options, you have no option. So you don't know where to go. You're drifting away. You can't save yourself. But if you have a lighthouse and you make one step forward, it's just one step. You have an aim. You have a direction. You're getting closer to your goal, to your purpose, even if it's one step at a time. And a good example is Joseph in the Bible. There are so many examples. People with purpose who understood their purpose in life. People like Daniel, like Esther, like Moses, Joseph. Joseph, he had 11 brothers who hated him because he was a dreamer. Son of Israel, also known as Jacob, one of the patriarchs of Israel. 12 children, 4 wives. And he had a dream. And he said, I had a dream. We were gathering wheat, and my sheaf of wheat stood in the middle, and all of your sheaves bowed down to my sheaf. And they said, what does that mean? Do you really think that we're all going to come to you at some point? Do you think you're better than all of us? And they started to resent him. And then his father brought him a robe. He bought him a robe for his birthday, perhaps. A colorful, long-sleeve robe that was traditional in those days. And they hated him for that. And then his brothers went with the flocks of sheep. And Jacob asked Joseph, can you go after your brothers, see where they are, and bring me some news? They were probably gone for a long time. And Joseph goes to his brothers in the field, goes for more than a week on foot. And when he arrives, his brothers see him from the distance and they say, here comes the dreamer. Imagine you had a skill like that. That was his skill. Imagine his brothers asking him, how is that going to help your career? You're never going to do anything with that. You're interpreting dreams. What kind of a skill is that? And his brothers started plotting against Joseph. And from the distance, they said, let's grab him and kill him. And we'll tell our father that a beast killed him or something like that. And sure enough, when Joseph arrives and meets his brothers, he's very glad. He's 17 years old. He's so happy to see his brothers after a long wait. And his brothers beat him up and throw him in a pit with no water. They take off his beautiful, colorful robe. No water, darkness, wet, empty. Have you ever been betrayed by your own family? Joseph was betrayed by his own siblings. And Reuben, who was the firstborn, probably big age gap between them, he said, let's not kill him. Let's sell him to some tradespeople, some merchants. And then they sell him off to some merchants who go to Egypt. They take him, they leave him. His brothers leave him completely, starving, dying of thirst. He sleeps in the pit. And then imagine you're Joseph in the pit at 17 years old, and then some merchants going to Egypt throw you a rope, and that's your only salvation. And then he comes out of the pit, and then he's brought to Egypt. Of course, his brothers tell his father a lie, that he was killed, and show him the blood-soaked robe that he brought him. And then Joseph ends up in Potiphar's house, and his wife tempts him. But Joseph is wise. When she does that, he simply leaves his robe and runs away. Why? Because he doesn't want to put himself in that situation, in that scenario. And that's why you should never put yourself in a scenario, in a situation where you know that temptation may overcome you. And then Joseph ends up in prison, in the king's prison, with two very interesting people, the king's cupbearer and the king's chief baker, the king's sommelier, wine sommelier. And they have a dream. And the first one says, I had a dream. There was a vine, and it had 3 branches, and they were growing grapes, and I was squeezing the grape into the Pharaoh's cup, and I was put back into Pharaoh's service. And then Joseph said, well, I can tell you what that means. In 3 days' time, that is the three branches, you will be set free, and you will be put into the Pharaoh's service again. And the baker, when he heard the positive interpretation, he said, well, I had a dream too. What was your dream? Because you look very upset. Well, I dreamt that I had 3 baskets. I was carrying 3 baskets on my head with baked goods. And on the top basket, there were baked goods, and the birds came and ate them all up. What does that mean? Well, the 3 baskets are 3 days. But unfortunately, in 3 days' time, you will die. And he goes away, very upset, very shocked, very disturbed. And they think, surely this can't happen. This can't happen to me. And he doesn't sleep at night. He's restless. And then in 3 days' time, it's the king's birthday. And they hear a knock on the door of their cell. And the Pharaoh is asking for the cupbearer because it's his birthday party and wanted him to serve again. So he's released, but the baker dies. And when he's released, Joseph tells him, remember me, because I helped you when you needed it the most. Remember me when you're up there next to the Pharaoh. But he forgot about him for 2 years. He forgot. Have you had a friend like that? Who forgets about who you are when you need it the most? And he was in prison for another 2 years. And then all of a sudden the Pharaoh has a dream, and he dreams a strange dream. There's 7 thin and ugly cows eating 7 fat cows. He wakes up, dreams another dream again earlier in the morning, basically the same dream. And he's asking all his wise men, who can interpret this dream? No one can. And then the cupbearer says, now I remember my mistake. I made a mistake. There's this person called Joseph. He's a Jew, was a Jew slave, who knows how to interpret dreams. What a skill to have, right, for your career. And then he asks Joseph to come and meet the Pharaoh in audience with the king of Egypt. So Joseph cleans himself, he changes himself, and he shaves, and he goes to the most consequential meeting of his life, to meet Pharaoh. And then he gives Pharaoh the interpretation. And he says, there's going to be 7 years of wealth, and then 7 years of famine. You should do this. He was a project manager. You should try to build barns and save wheat and grain so that you have plenty of food for the famine. And that was the most important meeting of his life. And that is exactly where he used his gift. And Pharaoh tells him and his servants, is there anyone in all of Egypt who has the Spirit of God like this man? And he makes him prime minister, puts him second in charge after Pharaoh over all of Egypt. He doesn't say, is there anyone more skilled than this person at managing others? He's asking about God because he had the Spirit of God. So eventually, when his brothers come to Egypt for food, he eventually, the second year, he uncovers himself, and then he's saying, I am your brother whom you sold in Egypt when I was 17. He was in his 30s then, 13, 15 years later. And he says to them, don't be angry with yourselves, because God had a purpose. When you sold me, you did that to do evil. But God wanted to use this for good. And by the way, don't quarrel on the way back. That's what he told them. So Joseph finally realizes the purpose of his life. And that was the purpose of his life. He later on, with all of his brothers, created the state of Israel, the nation of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel. And then he also unites with his father Israel, or Jacob. And I think the story of Joseph is also a love story between Joseph and his father. So purpose, throughout his life, he didn't really understand what his purpose was when he was in that pit. But he understood later on that God had a purpose with him. Now, what is purpose? What is meaning? The second point I want to make is suffering. And Viktor Frankl in his book makes this point very clear. If you discover suffering in your life, you discover meaning. And you can find meaning through suffering. And every one of us have suffered and are going to go through pain and suffering. How do you discover meaning in that? Well, Viktor Frankl talked about discovering meaning and wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning, a very popular book. And that was his experience at Auschwitz and in the concentration camps. He was sent to Auschwitz and he was a psychiatrist, and he wanted to understand the psychiatry of those incarcerated in prison camps. And first of all, he thought there were 3 stages that he describes in the book. The first one is utter shock, and then the illusion of being reprieved of their sentence, of the reality around them. The second one was apathy, and the third one was liberation. The people simply didn't know what to do and they found themselves free. And he is talking about something really interesting in the book, Man's Search for Meaning. He, at one point, talks about a person in the concentration camps, and he describes the horrors of the concentration camps, which are it's a must read. It's really, really worthwhile, worth reading. And he says, there was a man in one of the beds, no mattress, very cramped space, and he was twitching in his sleep, obviously having a nightmare. And I wanted to grab his hand and wake him up, but I realized if I did that, I would wake him up to a reality that is much worse than his nightmare. So I left him sleep. So he left him sleep. He went through the worst of the circumstances, the worst suffering ever, the worst things possible, the worst thing imaginable. And he said, only 2% of the people in the prison camps made it out alive. 98% of them died there. But there are a few things that kept people alive, and one of them was faith in God. People who were faithful and were hopeful and hoped for a better life, hoped for something else bigger than themselves, made it out alive. And also people who loved others and who shared their love and showed small acts of kindness. For example, even prison guards shared an additional slice of bread. They lived on 1 slice of bread per day with a bowl of very, very watery soup, whilst working in the winter, sometimes barefoot, in the most horrible of conditions. So love and faith were the ones that were 2 things that kept them alive. But there's a third thing. What does meaning mean? What is meaning? And that's love. And Viktor Frankl mentions his wife. He was separated by his wife. He didn't know whether she lived or not. Had no notice, no news from her. And then eventually, he looked at the sky and thought about her. And that love for someone was the main thing that kept him alive. What is the meaning of life? The meaning is lived. It's not just a concept. It's a practical application. And ask yourself, when you go through suffering, for example, through pain, what is God expecting me to do here? Because what you do in the midst of the most difficult circumstances reveals your character. And that's who you are. And that gives you meaning. Now, it's a practical thing, so it's not theoretical. And I want to draw your attention to John's prologue. This is how the text starts. At the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. What is the Word? In Greek, John is using there the word logos. And logos in Greek is a very, very strong term. It's a philosophical term for the Greeks at the time, in the culture at the time. And it meant word, language, and this is how we get the word logic from, and reason. So, what John is saying is that in the beginning was the Word, that is God, the incarnate Word, Jesus, in the beginning was Jesus, and Jesus is love. So the Greeks were trying to understand what is the purpose of things, what is the purpose of man, of people in general. So if you take a chair, the purpose of a chair is for people to sit on it. But if you're trying to use that chair to move from A to B, you probably need some wheels. You can't use it efficiently because that wasn't designed to be to work as a transportation means. So the chair's purpose is for people to sit on it. You need to understand the purpose of things to be able to use them efficiently. What about your life? What is the purpose of your life? The Greeks were asking themselves, what is the purpose of my life? Because if you understand your purpose, the meaning of your life, you will live a meaningful life and you will be much happier. So what John is saying, he is saying something revolutionary. He is saying that the logos is the purpose of your life. The meaning of your life is Jesus, and that's love. That is the meaning of your life. This is what John is saying, which is so revolutionary. And you find your purpose at the cross in Jesus Christ. That is the meaning of life. How do you understand meaning, and how does this affect me? Well, Frankl, again, Viktor Frankl in his Man's Search for Meaning, talks about three things. By creating work or a good deed, number one, and then secondly, by experiencing something or by encountering someone, by love that is, and thirdly, by the attitude we take in the midst of suffering. So the first one is quite straightforward. You need to create something rather than just follow others, what others do. You need to do something yourself and have a purpose, have a direction in your life. And do something that's difficult, do something that's hard. Anything that is hard, anything that is difficult is worth doing. Try to create something yourself, to proactively do something yourself. Are you one of those people when the teacher or your manager asks, I need a volunteer to help me with this project? Are you one of those people who sits at the back and puts the head in their eyes down and doesn't say anything? Are you one of those people who volunteer first? Well, you need to volunteer first. You need to do whatever is difficult, whatever is worthwhile. If you aim for comfort, if you want a full fridge, if you want a full bank account, if you want to have no worries, you will reach there and you will have all of these. But the problem is, you will look back and say, there is no meaning. I still feel empty. That hasn't satisfied me at all. There's a famous novella or short story by Tolstoy, How Much Land Does a Man Need? And there's this peasant called Pahom, who, and the novella is about greed and land, and a peasant in 19th century Russia who wants to acquire more land. And he looks at a piece of land, a plot of land at the edge of a village, and he said, this is the most perfect plot of land that I can think of. You know, if I had this, I would be happy. That's it. I would be settled for life. And he saves money. He saves up quite a lot of money. And eventually, he goes there again, visits the plot of land, and he looks at it. It's so green, flat, it's so beautiful. He sees the potential in it. And then he buys it. And when he buys it, he's got it. And then he walks on the plot of land again, and he says, it doesn't feel the same. I'm still not satisfied. I've got where I wanted to be, but I'm still not satisfied. Maybe because you were chasing something that doesn't give you satisfaction, that doesn't give you meaning. I strongly encourage you to read or listen to How Much Land Does a Man Need? The story of Leo Tolstoy. Secondly, by experiencing something or encountering someone, by love, showing love. Notice how this is outward looking, not inward looking. And think about this, when you encounter someone new, ask yourself, what is God asking of me here? What does God want me to do here? What is the meaning of me meeting this person now? And how can I make the most of it? How can I discover the meaning? And how can I make the most of it? It will change your outlook on life. And thirdly, the attitude we have towards unavoidable thinking. Transform any tragedy into triumph. This is what Frankl did. He lived through Auschwitz, he lived through the concentration camps to tell the story and to emphasize what faith meant for the prisoners in those circumstances. And he transformed meaning in a triumph. So, in more practical terms, how can you discover your own meaning? There are various ways, and there's of course many public intellectuals and authors like Simon Sinek start with Why. It's a very good book. There's Philip Brooks. He's a Harvard professor. Arthur Brooks, Harvard professor, a New York Times bestseller, The Meaning of Your Life. I strongly encourage you to read it too, from a Christian perspective. There are others who give you tests and questions. What can you ask to discover your own meaning in your own life? And one of this is this. Think about 4 questions. The first one, what are you good at and what do you love doing? Think about it. Secondly, who is it for? Thirdly, what do those people need or want that you could deliver? And fourthly, how does that and how do those people change and transform as a result of what you do? And notice how most of these questions are outward looking. They're about others that might as well tell you what you're meant to be doing in your life. And finally, why now? This is the 4th point, the now. The meaning crisis in the young generation is here. It's quite acute. Many feel empty, many feel depressed, anxious, many feel directionless and with no purpose. And they fail to look at God and the higher purpose, that there is something higher than yourself. And the meaning of your life may not be revealed through a certain circumstance, but it might be revealed 20 years later. That boy that I talked about didn't know about the meaning of what the meaning of those events were when he was 5. But 20 years later, looking back, I understood that God had a purpose and that had a meaning. And I tried to transform that tragedy, that suffering, into something positive. So, if there's anything I want you to remember, and if there's something you can remember today, that I would like you to do is this. Take your gift, think about your gift, what you're good at, what you're meant to do, and use that in the next week to serve someone else. And see what happens. See what happens. Finally, I want to read from Viktor Frankl what he said about success. Don't chase success, but try to follow the will of the Lord, and success will follow after. So this is what Frankl said about success. Don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you're going to miss it. For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue, and it only does so as the unintended side effect of one's dedication to a cause greater than oneself, or as the byproduct of another's surrender to a person other than oneself. Happiness must happen, and the same holds for success. You have to let it happen by not caring about it. I want you to listen to what your conscience commands you to do and go on to carry it out to the best of your knowledge. Then you will live to see that in the long run I say, success will follow you precisely because you had forgotten to think about it. Joseph didn't think of success. That wasn't his highest priority. He wasn't aiming at becoming a prime minister. He was aiming at obeying the Lord and of glorifying God through his actions, through everything he did. And first, God gave him, small projects to do. He put him in charge of Potiphar's house, a project manager, to be in charge of a team. And then he was faithful in small things. And let me tell you something. If you are faithful in the small things, in the little things, God will put you in charge of bigger things too. And this can happen exponentially. Like with Joseph, he was in charge of a small team, and before he knew it, he was the prime minister of all of Egypt. Be faithful in the small things. Try to find meaning in the small things. And then God will raise you and will bring you success, will give you success. But don't aim for that. It will happen as a byproduct of your faithfulness to God. So finally, your life is not meaningless, but it's your responsibility to make it meaningful. Thank you very much.